You know, some cases just, they stick with you. And
Yeah.
the disappearance of Morgan Harrington is definitely one of those. She
Mm.
was only 20, a college student at Virginia Tech, vanished from a Metallica concert in Charlottesville back in 2009.
Uh-huh.
And it's a kind of story that the more you learn, the more questions you end up having.
Yeah, it's almost like every answer just leads to another question.
Exactly.
What's really interesting here is that this wasn't your typical missing person case.
How so?
It wasn't just that Morgan disappeared. It was the circumstances surrounding her disappearance that were so odd.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Well, for example, they found her purse early on,
Okay.
and it was completely intact. Wallet, ID, everything.
So it was just like she set it down and walked away.
Pretty much.
That's so strange. Why would someone willingly part with their purse, especially at a crowded concert?
Right.
It almost feels like a clue right from the start, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Like it's telling us something about what happened.
It immediately suggested that this wasn't a robbery or a simple case of someone just running away.
Yeah, okay.
There was something more complex going on.
To try and understand what happened,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be diving into interviews with Morgan's mother, Jill,
Yes.
and excerpts from the true crime podcast Anatomy of Murder.
That's right.
And I think Jill's perspective is so important.
For sure.
You know, she's been such a powerful advocate for Morgan.
Yeah, she has.
It must be incredibly difficult to talk about this,
Absolutely.
but I imagine it's so important to understanding who Morgan was
It is.
and what her life was like before that night.
You get a real sense of Morgan's personality from Jill's interviews.
No, real.
She loved music.
What kind of music was she into?
Everything. From Barry Manilow to Bob Marley.
Wow, that's quite a range.
Is.
And of course, Metallica.
Of course.
Wait, Metallica.
Yeah,
That makes her disappearance from their concert even more eerie.
it really does.
Okay, so
Speaking of that night.
yeah, let's try and piece together what happened.
Right.
We know that Morgan drove to the concert with friends.
Yeah.
It was a big deal for her. She was excited to see Metallica live.
Yeah.
Okay, so picture this.
Okay.
It's October 17th, 2009. The concert's in full swing.
Right.
At some point during the opening act,
Mm-hmm.
Morgan goes to use the restroom and vanishes.
Well, not quite vanishes. There was a reported incident where someone saw her fall in the bathroom.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and a nurse helped her up
Okay.
because she had like a cut on her chin.
Hold on.
Yeah,
Do we know if that fall could disoriented her in some way?
it's a good question.
Like, could that have played a role in what happened next?
It's certainly a question that investigators considered.
Okay.
But what we know for sure is that after that, her friends couldn't find her,
Oh, wow.
and they kept calling her phone.
And
Finally, around 8:48 p.m.,
okay.
Morgan answers and tells them that she's outside the venue and she can't get back in.
That doesn't make sense. Don't most venues have pretty strict rules about reentry?
They do.
It sounds like something must have happened that forced her out,
Yeah.
or at least made her think that she couldn't get back in.
Right.
Okay, so then what?
Well, then around 9:23 p.m., Morgan was spotted alone near the Copley Road Bridge,
Okay,
seemingly looking for a ride.
so that was the last time anyone saw her.
That's right, the last confirmed sighting.
So the bridge becomes a key location in the investigation.
Absolutely.
But this is where I get confused.
Okay.
If she was seen looking for a ride, doesn't that suggest that she willingly left the concert?
Yeah, you would think so.
So why was everyone so worried?
Well, because a few days later, her phone was found in a parking lot near the venue.
Oh, okay.
And remember, this is 2009.
Right.
A phone back then was a lifeline, especially for a young person in a potentially risky situation.
So you're saying it's unlikely that she would just abandon her phone?
Exactly.
Okay, so the purse being left behind suggests that this wasn't a typical crime.
Right.
And then the phone adds another layer of mystery.
It does.
Okay.
What happens next?
About a month later, there's a development that seemed like it could be a break in the case.
Oh, really?
Yeah, someone finds Morgan's Black Pantera t-shirt
Okay.
draped over a bush at the University of Virginia.
UVA?
That's miles away from where the concert was.
Miles away.
Yeah.
A Pantera shirt miles away from the concert.
Right.
Was that just a random discard?
Maybe.
Or could it have been a clue left by whoever was involved?
That was the big question.
Was it a clue or some sort of message, a morbid trophy?
Yeah, any of those are possible.
It definitely raises more questions than it answers.
For sure.
And it sounds like Morgan's mother, Jill, believes that it was intentional,
Yes.
like a taunt even.
Yeah, she's convinced that whoever was responsible knew the area well.
So they were local.
That's what she believes.
That's a terrifying thought.
I know.
The idea that someone capable of doing this was hiding in plain sight
Yeah.
within the community.
Right. But was there any evidence to support that idea?
Well, not at this stage.
Okay.
And sadly, about 3 months after Morgan disappeared, the worst fears were confirmed.
Oh, no.
A farmer found her remains on his property,
Oh, that's awful.
just a few miles from Charlottesville.
And so, did they determine a cause of death?
The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide,
Okay.
but the exact cause was undetermined.
Undetermined.
Yes. The discovery of Morgan's remains was just devastating, for her family, for the community.
Absolutely.
But it did bring a renewed sense of urgency to the investigation.
Right.
They were determined to find out what had happened to her and bring her killer to justice.
You mentioned earlier that the cause of death was undetermined.
Yes.
What does that actually mean in this context?
So in this case, it means that because of the time that had passed
Okay.
and the condition of the remains,
Yeah.
the medical examiner couldn't say exactly how she died.
So it makes it even harder to figure out what happened.
Okay,
It's like
right.
another piece of the puzzle is missing. Okay, so at this point in the investigation, they have the purse, the phone,
Uh-huh.
that really unsettling detail about the shirt found miles away,
Yeah.
and tragically her remains.
Right.
Were there any other clues, anything else for the investigators to work with?
There was one more piece of evidence that would turn out to be crucial.
Okay, tell me about it.
It was a bloodstain
A bloodstain.
on Morgan's Pantera shirt,
Oh, wow.
and that bloodstain had DNA in it.
Was it Morgan's?
No, it wasn't hers.
DNA evidence.
Yeah,
That must have been a huge development for the investigators.
it was.
It feels like something straight out of a crime drama,
Right.
but this was real life with
Right.
real consequences.
Absolutely. And this was 2010, keep in mind.
Right.
DNA technology was advancing rapidly,
Sure.
but the databases weren't nearly as big as they are today.
Okay.
So finding a match back then was a much bigger deal.
So did they find a match?
They did. But it wasn't an immediate hit.
What do you mean?
It took years before the DNA from Morgan's shirt was linked to another attack.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, on a young woman.
Okay.
That had happened 4 years earlier in Fairfax, Virginia.
Fairfax.
Mhm.
That's over 100 miles from Charlottesville.
It is.
And earlier you said that Jill, Morgan's mother, believed that whoever did this was local.
Right.
Did this new information challenge that belief?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay, how so?
The expert on anatomy of murder explained that it's not that uncommon for serial predators to operate in different areas.
So they could have a connection to both places.
Right. Or maybe they travel between them for work or some other reason.
Gotcha. Okay, so they have a DNA match to another attack. Did that give investigators any new leads?
It did. And this is where the idea of a predator's comfort zone comes into play.
You mentioned that term earlier, but to be honest,
Yeah.
I need a little more explanation.
Okay, sure.
What does it mean? And why is it important in this case?
Basically, criminologists use this term to describe the patterns that we see in predator behavior.
Patterns. Like what?
Well, they tend to target a specific type of victim,
Okay.
and they do it in areas that they know well.
So places where they feel comfortable.
Exactly. And confident that they can get away with it.
That makes sense. So are you saying that there are similarities between Morgan's case and this other attack?
There are some disturbing similarities.
Like what?
Both victims were young women,
Okay.
both were attacked in the fall,
Uh-huh.
and both were assaulted in a really similar manner.
So this is suggesting a pattern.
Yeah, it suggests a possible predator
Right.
operating within a certain comfort zone.
Potentially traveling between Charlottesville and Fairfax.
It's possible.
That's really chilling.
It is.
Okay, so was the DNA match enough to actually identify the perpetrator?
Not quite. But the other case did provide another piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
This victim, they called her RG to protect her identity.
Okay.
She was able to give a really detailed description of her attacker. Yeah, and that led to the creation of a composite sketch.
A sketch.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's something tangible for investigators to work with
Right.
and for the public to be on the lookout for.
Right.
It makes the whole thing feel more real, more urgent somehow.
For sure.
Did it lead to any breakthroughs?
It was circulated widely,
Okay.
but unfortunately, no solid leads came up right away.
Oh, so even with the DNA link
Yeah,
and the sketch, years went by without any real progress in the case.
right.
I can't even imagine how frustrating that must have been
I know.
for Morgan's family, just that feeling that the trail had gone cold.
It must have been agonizing.
But I know Jill never gave up hope.
No, she didn't.
What did she do?
Well, she became a relentless advocate for Morgan.
What do you mean?
She was on TV. She spoke at events.
Wow.
She even stood on that Copley Road bridge year after year,
Really?
urging anyone with information to come forward.
It's hard to even fathom that kind of strength. To keep fighting like that even when the odds seem stacked against you.
It's incredible.
And her efforts didn't go unnoticed, did they?
They didn't. She actually got support from a pretty unexpected source.
Oh.
James Hetfield.
Wait, James Hetfield?
Yeah.
Like the lead singer of Metallica.
The one and only.
Wow.
Right.
I'll admit I'm not a huge Metallica fan myself.
That's okay.
Could you explain why his involvement was so significant?
So Metallica, they're like one of the biggest heavy metal bands in the world.
Okay.
And they have a huge, dedicated fan base.
I can imagine.
So when James Hetfield reached out to Morgan's family, offered a reward,
Wow.
and recorded PSAs about the case.
Public service announcements.
Yeah, it brought a whole new level of attention to the case.
That's amazing. It shows that even in the middle of fame and fortune, you know, rock and roll, there's still compassion.
There is.
And a desire to help.
It's a good reminder.
Did this new attention from Hetfield lead to any solid leads?
Unfortunately, not at that time.
Oh, man.
But then, in a chilling echo of history, in 2014, another young woman vanishes from Charlottesville.
Oh, no. Are you serious?
Yeah, her name was Hannah Graham.
Hannah Graham.
And her disappearance had some eerie similarities to Morgan's case.
Another disappearance.
I know.
This must have been just devastating for the community.
It was.
Especially for Morgan's family.
Especially for Jill, yeah. Must have felt like her worst fears were coming true.
Like the predator she'd been warning about for years was still out there.
Exactly.
So what happened with Hannah Graham's case?
The investigation into Hannah's disappearance moved much faster.
Okay.
Unlike with Morgan, there were witnesses who had seen Hannah with a man shortly before she vanished.
Interesting.
And that, combined with some surveillance footage, led investigators to a suspect.
A suspect, finally.
His name was Jesse Matthew Jr.
Jesse Matthew Jr. Okay, so they had a suspect.
Yeah.
So did they have any evidence linking him to Morgan's case?
Not at that point.
Okay.
But as they started digging into his background, they uncovered a disturbing history of violence against women.
Oh, no.
It became clear that he fit the profile of the kind of predator they were looking for in both Morgan and RG's cases.
So they had a suspect, but no direct evidence linking him to Morgan.
Right.
So what happens next?
Well, the investigation continues.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that even with a suspect in custody, these kinds of forensic investigations take time.
Of course, it's not like on TV where they get DNA results in an hour, right?
Exactly. It's a slow and painstaking process.
And in this case, that process led to a major breakthrough.
It did.
Tell me everything.
Okay, so remember that DNA sample from Morgan's shirt?
The one that linked her case to RG?
Yes. When investigators finally ran Jesse Matthew Jr.'s DNA, it was a match.
Wow, so after all these years,
I know.
They finally had concrete evidence
They did.
linking him to Morgan's murder.
It was a huge moment in the case.
It must have been such a relief for everyone involved.
Oh, sure.
Especially for Jill.
Absolutely.
To finally have some answers after all this time.
But it was a bittersweet victory, you know.
How so?
It brought closure, finally, to the mystery of Morgan's disappearance.
Right.
But it also made it clear that both her and Hannah's deaths might have been prevented.
Are you saying that if things had been different, if the dots had been connected sooner, these tragedies could have been avoided?
It's a tough pill to swallow, I know.
It's hard to wrap my head around that, you know.
I know.
That if things had been different, if they'd connected the dots faster, these tragedies might have been prevented.
It's a question that haunts a lot of cases like this.
I bet.
But I think it's important to remember that forensic science and investigative techniques, you know, they were evolving so rapidly back then.
Right. It was all pretty new territory.
Yeah. The awareness of the patterns of serial predators.
Right.
The use of DNA databases.
That makes you wonder what could have been, you know.
It does.
But in this case, those advances ultimately led to Jesse Matthew Jr.'s arrest.
They did.
And conviction. He was charged with the murders of both Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham.
He was. And eventually, he actually confessed to both crimes.
He confessed.
He did.
Wow.
It gave the families some much-needed closure.
I can imagine.
But it also revealed the chilling details of what he did.
It's hard to even think about it.
It is.
He received multiple life sentences, right?
He did. He'll never be able to hurt anyone else.
That's good, at least.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to find the right words, you know?
I know, Evie.
When you're faced with such horrific acts, on the one hand, there's relief,
Of course.
knowing that he's behind bars. But on the other hand, there's that nagging question.
The what if. What if they had investigated Morgan's case more thoroughly from the beginning?
Right.
What if they had focused more on the possibility of a local connection? What if they'd processed the DNA evidence from RG's attack faster?
Yeah.
Potentially linking the cases before Hannah Graham disappeared.
It's impossible to ignore those questions, isn't it?
It's hard.
It forces us to confront the fact that sometimes systems that are supposed to protect us, they can fail.
They can.
And those failures can have devastating consequences.
Absolutely.
I think this case really highlights the importance of people like Jill Harrington.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, advocates who refuse to let these cases just fade away.
Right.
Who demand answers and push for accountability.
They're so crucial.
Their voices are so important.
For sure.
Not just for seeking justice, but also for pushing for systemic change.
It's not just about one case.
No.
It's about trying to prevent it from happening again.
Jill's story is just, it's heartbreaking, of course.
Of course.
But it's also incredibly inspiring.
It is.
She turned her grief into action.
She did.
She became this powerful voice for victims' rights.
She really did.
And she tirelessly advocated for improvements, you know, for better forensic technology and investigative practices.
Absolutely.
Her strength and determination are just remarkable.
They are.
It's a testament to the human spirit.
It really is.
You know, to be able to find meaning and purpose even when facing unimaginable loss.
That's inspiring.
So, looking back at everything we've learned, what do you think are the most important takeaways from Morgan Harrington's case?
Well, I think there are several.
Okay.
First, it highlights how important vigilance and awareness are.
What do you mean?
I mean, as individuals, we need to be more aware of our surroundings.
Okay.
Pay attention to our gut feelings.
Right. If something feels off
Exactly.
or someone makes you uncomfortable, trust your instincts.
And take steps to protect yourself.
Don't ignore those red flags. It's easy to dismiss those feelings, you know?
It is, but as we've seen in this case, sometimes listening to your gut can save your life.
So true.
Second, this case really underscores the importance of forensic science and DNA technology in solving crimes.
Right, like we talked about earlier.
Being able to connect seemingly unrelated cases through DNA, that's a really powerful tool for law enforcement.
It's incredible how far it's come.
It is.
But it also emphasizes the need for continued investment in these technologies, right?
Right.
And expanding those DNA databases.
To make sure that justice can be served more quickly.
To prevent future tragedies.
Exactly.
And of course, it highlights the importance of communication and collaboration between law enforcement agencies.
Absolutely.
Sharing information, connecting the dots between cases, even across different jurisdictions.
That's so important.
It can be crucial in identifying and catching these perpetrators.
It can.
And I think this case is a stark reminder that even in places that seem safe, evil can still exist, you know? It reminds us that we all have a part to play.
We do.
In creating a safer world.
For everyone.
For ourselves and for future generations.
Absolutely.
There's a quote from Jill Harrington.
Oh, yeah?
That stuck with me.
What is it?
She said, "We must never forget the victims. We must honor their memories by fighting for justice and working to prevent future tragedies."
Powerful words.
They are. And as we wrap up this deep dive into Morgan Harrington's case,
Yeah.
our thoughts are with her family and friends.
Of course.
And with the families of all victims of violence.
Absolutely.
Their stories are a reminder that even in the face of such darkness, hope and resilience can still exist.
We can.
And that by working together, we can create a world where these tragedies are no longer possible.
Hopefully one day.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for having me.